Coming up on CMI, Elton Brand's basketball journey has taken him from the highest highs as an amateur to the lowest lows as a pro. Now, the all-star forward sits down with Chris Myers and explains why he's committed to turning around the Clippers ship.
I looked at LA and said, I'd rather go there. And he's like,
yeah, wow.
Clippers?
The former #1 pick also admits how good it feels to prove his critics wrong, reveals why Coach K benched him at Duke, and confesses that his mom's home cooking helps keep his ego from getting too big, but not his waist.
Come on, Mom. You know, I can't have the fried chicken and macaroni and cheese every night.
Find out how this unheralded superstar is making his mark on the NBA. Right now on CMI, the Chris Myers interview.
Thanks for being with us. A pleasure to be talking to Elton Brand. Once again, an all-star. You play for Los Angeles, second largest market in the country, a winning team, and yet it's not a brand name, if I can use the pun. Thanks for taking a moment with us. Are you surprised by that?
You know, not surprised. You know, I've learned through the years, you know, my time in Chicago, my tenure out there, that, you know, you get the individual accolades with team success. And you know, even though we've improved, but the Clippers haven't really won a lot of ball games, you know, until now. You know, this year we've really, you know, set ourselves apart. But
you've always put up the good numbers since you've come into the league and gotten better. Having an MVP type year this year.
Oh yeah, and you know, 20 and 10, you know, is about my average or whatever. But you know, you see what people call all-star snubs. You know, guys that didn't make it, but they're averaging, you know, good numbers, but they're teams. So the coaches vote on winning.
So you think people in the league, in the game, know the value of Elton Brand, know the kind of player he is?
Oh yeah, you know, I feel, you know, the coaches, you know, players, you know, they understand that, you know, I've been a good player all along. But you know, the coaches, like I said, vote. You know, they give age, you know, benefit of the doubt. Right. If you can't make a few all-star teams, and you know, winning.
And how about your individual emergence? What's been the biggest difference for that? It's always been there, but it seems like it's been a little bit better. Is it more the team around you?
I think it's more the team around me, Chris. You know, it's the guys. You know, Sam Cassell.
Right. It's really helped finish games and close games.
Yeah, Catino Mobley. You know, they're win-tested veterans. You know, battle-tested veterans. You know, Sam has 2 rings, 2 championship rings, and you know, make my job a lot easier. You know, I'm averaging, you know, 5 or 6 more points a game. You know, rebounds are about the same, but you know, the points can be attributed to just getting, you know, better looks, because you got to guard those guys out there.
Are you the leader of this team?
Oh yeah, you know, definitely feel I'm the leader of this team, but you know, we take turns. You know, Sam, he's very vocal, and you know, he's been there, he's done that, and he's definitely a leader of this team also.
And you're not, I don't want to say shy, but not as vocal. Do you think that's one of the reasons, at least on the outside, that's how it feels? One of the reasons maybe you aren't more visible in the league?
You know, I think it's due to winning. You know, now, you know, I'm getting national shows, you know, like yours. You know what I mean? I'm doing, you know, more commercial things, and you know, everybody loves a winner. So I think that's
the main thing. And people, I think, still are having trouble. You know, the Clippers were so long the punchline to a joke. How much is there still a Laker inferiority complex? Or was there at one time?
You know, the Lakers, you know, you can't take anything away from that team. You know, they have the tradition, you know, they have the heritage, they have the banners. You know, you're going to have fans. You know, they were here first. You're going to have their many fans, you know, throughout, you know, LA area, you know, throughout the nation. But, you know, we're trying to carve our niche. We're trying to get our own fans, and, you know, we do have the Clipper Nation supporting us big time.
And there's some diehards that have been there from the beginning. Is it fair to say, Elton, that if the Clippers were in another city, not where the Lakers play, that you would be viewed entirely differently, especially this year?
You know, this year we've been, you know, viewed, you know, very well. You know, I think, you know, people understand that we are a contender, you know, we are playing well. But I think the losing in the past, it wouldn't have mattered. Okay. You know,
okay.
You know, you see the long playoff layoffs. You see, you know, the lack of all-stars. You know, the lack of MVPs. The lack of, you know, all NBA teams. You know, the Clippers. We didn't really have any of those accolades. And you know, regardless of what city they were in, I think it'd be kind of tough to, you know, give them a lot of notice.
It's funny, when you came out of Duke and were drafted by the Chicago Bulls, you had some guys that they were debating Lamar Odom or you, and since you guys became good friends, and you have a little history, right? You and him go back, played AAU ball, and Ron Artest was part of that group.
Yeah, we played Riverside Hawks in Manhattan, New York City. Ron Artest, myself, Lamar Odom, Eric Barkley. We had an NBA roster back when we were 14 years old, but we didn't know.
Now, recently, when there was a chance that Ron Artest could come to the Clippers, he made the call, you made the call, there was some communication. Would you have liked that to happen?
I would definitely like to, have Ron Artest on your team, depending on what it would have took. You know what I mean? I didn't know who they're going to trade for, but, he said I called him, but he actually called me.
He was working the deal.
He's working the deal, like, hey, I want to come to L.A., and, things like that. And
so no question about him, despite what we see on the outside, that he's, in your eyes, would be a good teammate.
Oh, he's a great teammate. All the problems that, have surfaced, is on the court stuff.
Right.
Because of winning. He wants to win. It's his passion. Off the court, he's with his family. He's not a problem at all.
Yeah, and it does a lot for charity. Now, you want to win too, but you show it in a different way, right? Is that controlled emotion, or do you sometimes need to kind of let things go?
I like more of a controlled emotion, just try to stay even keel, try to stay focused. If you get, you let the emotions get the best of you, it kind of, can hurt your game, things like that. And they see guys like, Tim Duncan, I used to hate it. He'd get a jump hook on you and wouldn't even, break a sweat or crack a grimace or anything. Made it look easy. But I like to stay even keel like that.
Yeah, you seem mature. Even at, I think it was one of your coaches at age 14 said, "I hope I'm as mature in my later years as Elton Brand is as a 13 or 14-year-old." Where you seem to have had that from day one. How do you explain that?
I think my mother. She instilled a lot into me. Especially work ethic. Just seeing her work so hard growing up, and single parent home, so I had to be the man of the house.
And she's still now. You bought her a place out west, right? Because she still lives back east. She comes out a little bit and catches all the games.
She hasn't missed a game.
Really?
She's on the road. She's everywhere. She's giving guys salve if their back hurts. All types of rub. And
she cooks for the gang.
Oh man, yeah.
So that helps keep you right in line if you need it, or helps with those emotions.
Kind of in line, she's cooking fried chicken and all the good stuff from back home,
You got the weight issue, right? You sometimes say, "Hey, Mom, that's part of why I'm playing a little better, right?
Exactly, Mom. Come on, Mom. I can't have the fried chicken and macaroni and cheese every night,
All right, we'll talk more about Elton Brand's game, how it's been elevated with Coach Mike Dunleavy, his days in Chicago, and the big decision leaving Duke, the first to leave early when we come back.
Also coming up,
Coach K, in your sophomore year, he get tough with you?
He says, go sit at the end of the bench. Go take a photo shoot.
Wow.
A little tougher than that,
yeah.
But those are the words I'll say on TV.
Plus,
so I'm thinking, hey, I'm going to go to the Bulls and I'm the man. It's no problem. He really, sat me down and explained, you guys are going to be pretty garbage.
you're watching CMI, the Chris Myers Interview.
With the first pick in the 1999 NBA Draft, the Chicago Bulls select Elton Brand from Duke University.
And we're talking with Elton Brand, who was the first player in the history of Duke and the great basketball program to leave early as a sophomore. How difficult was that decision?
That was definitely one of my toughest decisions. In early adulthood. Just have a great time. At Duke. Coach K. He was great. Just learning from being on his tutelage. Just it was a great time. But financially, I had to make a decision, step up, and take care of my family.
Now, didn't you? I remember seeing a line from you about when you went to college. Hey, you want to work on Wall Street one day and make a lot of money, right? So it just came a little early, Wall Street,
yeah.
in the shape of a hardwood, I guess.
That was it. I picked Duke, just for, of course, the great basketball program, but also the academia. I felt, you go to a great college like that, you get a great degree, you get a good job, and you'll still be able to help your family, buy your mom a place, things like that. But I got there and really played well, and was on the national scene and had that great opportunity to leave early.
What they always tell you about your game, what they liked, and then what you needed to work on. Because we heard when you were drafted, he's a tweener, 6'8", right? Is he tough enough? All that.
Oh, right. He can't block shots.
Right,
He's 6'8". Will he be able to score in the league? I heard it all.
But meanwhile, you were kind of doing it all, right?
Right. I quieted the naysayers right away. That rookie year, they say, okay, he could play on this level now. Is he going to win on this level? So, it's good to have a team around me right now, and we're doing big things.
And you won at the Duke level, right? I mean, that's automatic, and you were part of that. How frustrating was, though, that championship game, the Final Four, where UConn, the underdog, knocks you off?
No, it was difficult. It was very frustrating, to be number one almost all year long, and run the ACC, not lose a game, run the tables, and Richard Hamilton, Khalid El-Amin, Jake Bosco, they really deserved it. I try not to think about that game too much.
Bothers you, huh?
Yeah,
well, that's good.
Me.
Coach K, in your sophomore year, did he get tough with you, have to bench you at one point? Was there and how did that change things or affect your relationship?
People don't understand that year. I got all those individual accolades, Nate Smith, the Wooden Award. I didn't start.
First sophomore to win a Wooden Award.
Yeah, the first sophomore to win that prestigious award. I didn't even start 2 games that season.
That's right, injuries.
Coach K, felt that I was playing well, but he wanted me to play better.
Okay.
So he said, I remember we were in Alaska. It was the first game we lost. We lost 2 games that year. And, I wasn't having a great game. I was having an okay game. He says, go sit at the end of the bench. Go take a photo shoot.
Wow.
A little tougher than that.
Yeah.
Those are the words I would say on TV.
Okay.
Because he was disappointed. He knew what I had inside me, and, he wanted me to work harder.
And it made a difference. And do you stay in touch with him today? How often do you talk?
Oh yeah. He's still like a father figure. I always talk to him as much as I can.
And so he understood you leaving, but the legend is, and fans will remember this, that you got an email when leaving, right, from a female alum who said, "I graduated from Duke last May. This is when you made the decision to leave early, and just wanted to express my disgust for your decision." There's a number of things in here, but talks about you bailing on the program. Just really critical.
Yeah.
So that email you received, it was legit.
That was legit.
All right, and your response was, in a nutshell?
Well, the response in a nutshell was, look, lady, I don't know you, but you don't know me. You won't really, understand my situation. Financially, if you had to go through what I go through or went through, it'd be a no-brainer.
And there was kind of an urban legend with it that this email that was all over the place, or there were different responses. You'd seen different variations.
Yeah, that was the funny part. That was my, response in a nutshell. Like you wouldn't understand, And I seen about 4 different ones, all types of explicit language, all types of curses. Some Carolina fans must have got to it and changed it up or something. But it was funny. It got around the country fast. Everyone's asking about the email. Some were fans of the email. Some were like, "How could you say that?" I'm like, "What?"
So the little rivalry thing continued.
Oh, yeah.
First time in NBA history that 4 players from Duke were all chosen in the first round. Yourself, Trajan Langdon, Corey Maggette, William Avery, and Corey, of course, a teammate of yours now. So there was a lot of expectations, just like you had when you were chosen in Chicago. How did those expectations set with you, and how did they get altered along the way?
Well, ever since rec league back in Peekskill, growing up in Dunbar Heights, we won. We won, the Westchester County Pee Wee leagues for the first time. We won the high school state championship back to back. Getting out of our section for the first time. Duke was kind of having a down year before our recruiting class came. I helped, change that around, get them back on top where they belong. So I'm thinking, hey, I'm gonna go to the Bulls and. I'm the man. It's no problem. We're going to win 40 games and, change things around. But Coach K, my agent David Falk, he really, sat me down and explained, you guys are going to be pretty garbage.
That was tough to take?
It was.
You were still the man, but you weren't winning, right?
They let me know, like, from the beginning. They helped me understand salary cap, payroll.
So like team concept.
Team concept, young team. Young teams don't win in the professional leagues.
Right.
We're the youngest team every year. They were saving money after the Jordan era, and we didn't have any player with a contract. They traded crew coach right away.
Right, yep.
And we had Ron Artest, you know, it was myself. And
what was your first NBA game like that you got? You remember that? Was it difficult?
I'll never forget that. You know, it was against Miami, you know, with Zoe and PJ Brown, and that's when they were just, you know, elbow you in the head, and that's when they were tough. Then the next game was against the Knicks with Pat Ewing and, you know, Mason, you know, all those big guys back then. So, you know, I think I averaged about 7 points in those 2
So they were swatting some balls. And,
everything. It was tough down there. It was tough.
And you probably said, what did I get myself into, right? This is a totally different level. But
totally different.
And then people are questioning, right, this choice. Was leaving Chicago, it turned out to be a good thing. How did you feel at the time?
You know, you know, Jerry Krause, you know, I definitely thank him for the opportunity for drafting me and, you know, believing in me. You know, he came to me honestly and said, hey, you know, we're getting a lot of trade requests for you, and if something wows us, you know, we're going to have to, you know, probably take it. And I had a choice. I sat down with David Falk, my agent, and it was kind of D.C. That's when Michael Jordan was coming back, or, you know, the L.A. Clippers. And I looked at L.A. and said, you know, it's L.A., fun in the sun. They got Lamar Odom and my boy Corey Maggette and, you know, Quentin Richardson, Darius Miles. They're having a lot of fun, and, you know, I'd rather go there. And he's like,
yeah. Wow.
To the Clippers? They don't pay anybody. Why would you want to be with the Clippers? And I said, you know, we'll deal with that when that time comes.
Turned out to be a great call, maybe the greatest move the Clippers have ever made with All-Star Elton Brand. We'll ask him about staying a Clipper when there was a chance he almost was bailing for Miami when we come back here on CMI.
Also coming up,
Mike Dunleavy coming in as coach.
You know, coach is a winner, you know, and he's, you know, he's not shy to tell you that either.
Plus,
should they think of the Clippers differently now?
Definitely, you know, definitely. You know, not just, you know, the fans, but free agents, you know, everybody.
coming up next on CMI, the Chris Myers interview. Elton Brand reveals how he turned up the heat on the Clippers when it came time to sign a long-term contract.
Did you want to leave at that point?
You know, I was ready to leave. Yeah. You know, I was ready to leave, just thinking, you know, they weren't going to match. So I was preparing myself, for, you know, to move on, go to Miami.
Also on the way.
You played with, was it Team USA or the qualifying team? Yeah. And where do you stand for Team USA this time around?
Stick around for the answer next on CMI, the Chris Myers interview. You're watching CMI, the Chris Myers interview.
The pick, the roll, the shot, the dagger. What a play. He's matched his career high with 44. I mean, you talk about having a night. 44 points for Elton Brand.
We're continuing here with Elton Brand, 7th year in the NBA, 5th with the LA Clippers after 2 in Chicago. There was a chance, I believe it was around 2003, where the Miami Heat signed you to an offer sheet, and you were ready to go. And then what happened? What changed things?
You know, I signed the offer sheet, and I'm down in Miami, and you know, I talked to Donald T. Sterling, the owner here, and he said, we're going to match. And I didn't think they were going to match because the longest tenured Clipper was Eric Piakowski, for 4 years. I don't know what his deal was, but there wasn't any long-term deals, going around. And we actually had a pretty good season 2001, 2002, but we imploded because of contract negotiations. Mm-hmm. Guys weren't signed and things like that. So,
did you want to leave at that point?
I was ready to leave.
Yeah.
I was ready to leave, just thinking, they weren't going to match. So I was preparing myself for, to move on, go to Miami in the East, and, see what I could do there. But, once he told me to match, I was ready to come back. Come back to LA and, start, trying to win some ball games. Didn't want to alienate my teammates or the fans. I'm not that type of person.
Right, and Mike Dunleavy coming in as coach, not only changing the culture of the Clippers, but how did he work with you specifically to help you get the most out of your game?
Coach is a winner, and he's, he's not shy to tell you that either. He told us that early, like, I've won when I played. I've, took the Lakers to the finals. You know, Portland Western Conference Finals. You know, he's
He reminds you of that.
oh yeah, without a doubt. You know, because he's a great coach. He works very hard. He watches
discipline,
tons of film.
right, has been added here.
Oh
with
yeah,
him?
oh yeah, discipline. You know, he's a great leader for us, and you know he expected a lot out of me personally, and you know, Corey Maggette and the team, and you know, he said, I'm gonna get you the players around you. He's gonna do his best to get the players around you so that you can succeed, and you know, he definitely has.
When we go back to your roots and the Elton Brand Foundation, a charity group, well, first tell us what that, because that goes back to your hometown of Peekskill, New York, right?
Yeah, you know, Elton Brand Foundation, you know, we do work, you know, single parent homes, you know.
Important, since that's the way you were raised, obviously. And what do you, was it more financial, putting people in the right situations?
Yeah, it's financial. You know, we try to, you know, help with housing. You know, also, you know, technology. We try to get kids computers and things like that, because, you know, it's a technological age, and if you know you
fall behind.
Yeah, you can fall behind if you're not computer literate these days. And you know, when I was growing up, believe it or not, you know, high school '97, you know, '94 through '97, you know, computers were, you know, just getting in, you know, but I didn't have one at home, so I could have fell behind. I don't think I could afford one back then. So, you know, we try to get these kids, you know, computers. You
were on the gold medal winning team in '98 for the Goodwill Games, right? You played with was it Team USA or the qualifying team?
Yeah.
And where do you stand for Team USA this time around?
Well, with Team USA, you know, I met with Mr. Colangelo prior to when we played Phoenix, and you know, it's looking good. You know, they're not going to announce the invites till, you know, a few more weeks. But
and what I think they're looking for, at least from what I've heard, guys who fit in the team chemistry.
Yeah.
But obviously top-notch players. Is that how it was relayed to you?
Yeah, that's how it was. And he wanted to gauge my interest, and I let him know, you know, I'm very interested in, you know, Coach K is coaching, so, you know, I should have an in right there. No.
You should. I was going to say that. It should be automatic. So you'll be shocked if you're not there, right?
Well, no, I don't want to go that far.
Okay.
I don't want to be that cocky.
So you're confident but not cocky.
Yeah, you know, so we'll see.
How, at the power forward position, who were the guys that you idolized the most, either past or present, in terms of going up against or what you've seen them do? You
know, I watched, you know, basketball growing up, of course, but, you know, I liked Karl Malone. You know, the big guys I liked were Karl Malone. You know, grew up in New York, so, of course, you know, Patrick Ewing. I steal my brother's Patrick Ewing autographs all the time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, that's
I wrinkled
cool.
one up and got in trouble one time.
All right, so people are knowing and learning more about Elton Brand, which is good. They'll know more about the Clippers, right? Should they think of the Clippers differently now?
Definitely. You know, definitely. You know, not just, you know, the fans, but free agents, you know, everybody. They see you can come here, you can get a contract, you can come to the Clippers, you can win ball games. Right. And, you know, can compete at the highest level. You know, we have, you know, all the facilities right now. So, you know, it's definitely a top-notch, you know, organization now. You know, right. It's definitely grown.
And you're helping to keep it that way. Thanks for your time. It's great watching you play. It's a pleasure talking with you.
Thanks,
all
man.
All right, appreciate it. Elton Brand with us. We thank you for watching here on CMI. We'll see you next time. Take care.
Tune in next week when Chris sits down with the outspoken Mark Cuban. The Mavs Maverick owner reveals how he plans to turn Hollywood on its ear and explains how Paris Hilton could teach the NBA a thing or two about marketing. That's on the next episode of CMI, the Chris Myers Interview.